Hi everyone, let's break down the introduction session from another research article. The title of the research article is Effects of Dietary Arsenic Exposure on Liver Metabolism in Mice. So, the title suggests that the dietary arsenic exposure has implications on liver metabolism. So, from this research paper in introduction, we could expect the three things in the research rationale. One is the literature survey with respect to the arsenic effects, arsenic exposure on organisms. So next, we could expect the research gap. The research gap would be the dietary arsenic exposure. Probably there could be studies. So those studies not from the dietary arsenic exposure, but those studies could be some other sources of arsenic uh, exposure on liver metabolism or something else in the biological systems. So that we could expect. So in the first paragraph, we could expect the arsenic, general information about the arsenic and the effects. That means the effects of the arsenic and the dietary and other sources of arsenic exposure to organisms. That means the sources of arsenic exposure for organisms. And finally, we could see the information on the liver metabolism. So these three paragraphs we could expect here. So first one is the literature review about the arsenic exposure. Uh, so second one, the research gap, that is the dietary arsenic exposure studies um, not done earlier. So that is the one. So finally, the significance. So the significance of the study means the study improves understanding how the dietary arsenic exposure is different from the other way of arsenic exposure. That means the effect of this dietary arsenic exposure, how it differs from the other way of arsenic exposure on biological systems, and how they differ in causing the differences in biological systems. Okay, so let's see the introduction part here. In the introduction part, we could see that see the first few lines they explain about the arsenic, the general information, and how the exposure to arsenic. Okay, then the water, how the arsenic enters into the organisms through, that means the sources of the arsenic exposure. Okay, and the second line is about the effects of the arsenic. Third one is the sources of this arsenic exposure. Okay, this is the thing. See, in the second, there we could, in the first paragraph itself, and in the end, we could see that, however, new concerns have emerged regarding arsenic exposure through food sources. See, all the previous studies they focused on the drinking water contaminated arsenic exposure effect on the organisms, and now the new information is coming about the about the arsenic intake through the food also by the organisms. So how this arsenic could come into the organisms through food. See, especially through the rice. So through rice, it enters into the body. So there are reports that. So these are the studies that explained about how the rice could act as a source for the arsenic intake for organisms. See, in the last paragraph, there we could see that despite these complexities, current toxicological studies have primarily focused on the drinking water arsenic only. So, majority of the studies they're just focusing on the drinking water arsenic, but no study is focusing on the dietary arsenic intake. So that's why they focused on this one. So next, there are some studies, very few studies, which focused on dietary arsenic exposure also, but the studies are very limited, and the biological effects they studied are also very limited. Okay, so in this study they focused on few things, like for example, to understand the histopathological uh, information after arsenic exposure, and metabolical changes also they explored here. And next, they also uh, explored the gut and liver axis. So within the gut and liver axis, so these are the new things they focused in this work. So the significance of the work is, the significance is to shed the light on the potential implication of this arsenic, food arsenic, on the gut liver axis. So that is the significance. So they just want to know basically how this dietary food, that means no dietary arsenic intake affects the gut micro microbiome. So that is their interest here. So the previous study they reported some liver enzymes changes after arsenic exposure, and some small antioxidant oxidative system response in the organisms. So these kind of things they explored, but the previous studies did not explain how the gut microbiome is affected by this food arsenic. Okay, so this is the introduction part. So this introduction part has three parts, three sections. One is the literature, survey of this no water arsenic exposure effects. Then the second one is the sources of arsenic intake by organisms. And third one, what are the biological effects of this arsenic exposure? See, this all comes under the literature review. And they found the research gap that no studies have focused on how this food arsenic affects the microbiome. So that is the research gap. And the significance of the study, which is the third part of the rationale. So the significance of the study is that no, this approach allowed us to shed a light on, means that no, to focus on the potential implications of the gut liver axis in this arsenic induced liver injury. Okay, so this is the introduction part from this research article. So this is how we have to break down the introduction, so that you could understand the significance of the study, and that no research gap, and what literature explains about this particular topic. Thank you.